Donald Trump is now saying that stocks and financial markets are going to skyrocket. And he's totally convinced of that, so this statement is really gaining traction right now. We're checking out Donald Trump's latest interview, where he talks about the financial markets and mentions that the current inflation data is really, really good, and we can definitely expect massive increases. Let's see what else he has to say and what this means for Bitcoin. The US has now also made a ceasefire deal with Ukraine, and that should be positive for the financial markets as well. We're also seeing that Russia is opening up to Bitcoin. It says here that the central bank is now increasingly relying on Bitcoin. We take a look at what this means and whether the global Bitcoin race is now fully underway. First, we want to check out Donald Trump's new interview, and I know it can be a bit annoying that he's in the news so much and all that, but he's just the key player here. We now have a new, massive statement from him where he also addresses, why the markets will pump again. He said that, in the short term, he doesn't care about any of this. He doesn't care about the stock markets, he doesn't care about Bitcoin, he's just focused on the transition that's happening right now. This is also confirmed by the White House that it's about making a transition, finding a way to move from the current system to a new one where the government is just leaner, where spending is cut, and where deficits are reduced, and so on. And that could all become quite concerning. There could also be a lot of unrest. We've also got all the tariff issues, which could lead to a lot of unrest in the overall financial market. But now he's making a huge statement about the stock markets, or rather, the general financial markets are again linked to Bitcoin. When the traditional financial markets go up, Bitcoin goes up too. Check it out.
Financially, we'll be stronger than ever before. I think the markets are going to soar when they see what's happening. I'll tell you what, I'm called every day by numerous big companies. I spoke at the Business Roundtable yesterday.
So he says here, our nation will be stronger than ever before. That means the markets will pump, they will rise, it will go up, it will definitely be very, very positive. That means Bitcoin will rise, the stock market will rise, the general economy will rise, and he says that this will happen. As soon as people understand what is going on here, that means as soon as people understand what the USA is planning, that is to say the USA wants to go through a painful process first, wants to get itself back on track, maybe wants to make a clean slate here, cancel bullshit jobs, cancel any other unnecessary spending, audit the USAID Federal Reserve, audit Fort Knox, get this back on track. And that will lead to a lot of turbulence again. Then there's all the customs issues involved. When all of this is sorted out, when we know exactly what's going to happen next, which countries have customs duties and which countries don't have customs duties, when there are very clear regulations and perhaps the other countries come to terms with the USA, then, according to Donald Trump, the markets here will rise massively, and that would be very, very brutal. And in addition, there is now also the breaking news that Donald Trump sees the latest inflation figures here as very, very good, and people are already saying that rate cuts are coming bullish for Bitcoin. So here's the thing. Donald Trump is already speculating on rate cuts, meaning interest rate reductions, because the inflation data looks really good. So it looks like Donald Trump is currently paying more attention to inflation than to the stock markets or the Bitcoin price. That means he's looking at inflation here, because inflation is a very, very important indicator for bringing interest rates down. That means Donald Trump's highest priority here is interest rates, and the most important indicator for interest rates to bring interest rates down is inflation, or you can take the massively painful route of triggering a recession or provoking a war, but I don't think anyone wants that. So it would be better to just bring down inflation, which would then pressure the Fed or maybe even force them to lower interest rates. That could trigger a massive upward surge, and that's what Donald Trump is talking about when he says they will see the markets rise. But for that, you need new money, you need new liquidity, and to keep interest rates low, you need low inflation. And that's why Donald Trump is very amused about the current inflation numbers, which are better than expected. Now let's take another look at what else he has to say in this interview, because he's mentioning some other interesting things.
They had the largest attendance they've ever had. And these are only the CEOs and chairmen, but mostly the people that run, the boss, the people that run the top 150 companies. 150 people showed up. Every single company showed up. First time it ever happened. It's been around a long time. The biggest business leaders. We had a great discussion. It went really well. And I want to tell you, there's tremendous optimism out there about our country in terms of regulations being cut, in terms of taxes being cut. And it would be great if the Democrats would do what's right. It would be great if the Democrats would do what's right for our country for a change, because they really are there. They've lost their way. They've lost their way.
So let's dive into the reasons why the markets are going to rise. Of course, it's because inflation is going down, and there are potential interest rate cuts coming, not tomorrow, but maybe in the next 4 or 5 or 6 months or so. Then he goes on to say that he met with the top business people in the USA, the top CEOs, and simply gauged the sentiment. Okay, what is the economic mood? What is the economic situation? And he means that there is massive optimism here in the US because of the lower regulation that is now potentially coming to the US, because of the potential tax cuts that are coming here. I don't know if that was already some kind of promise of tax cuts. There have also been ongoing discussions about whether capital gains taxes might be completely suspended or even if income tax could be put on hold. I mean, those would be massive drivers for the economy, and that would pump the stock markets and everything else up. I mean, we need to keep an eye on that. He definitely said that the sentiment is bullish. I mean, you have to look at it a bit critically because just because Donald Trump says it doesn't mean it's going to happen that way. Donald Trump can't control everything here or anything like that. Donald Trump isn't exactly, let's say, he doesn't have all the wisdom in the world or anything like that, nor is he the Oracle of Delphi or something. That means you have to look at the statements with a bit of skepticism, but right now, it's just the case that Donald Trump is setting the pace here, or the US is setting the tone for how things are going on the financial markets. He then shared another exciting piece of news here. Trump says that the USA will react to the EU's counter-tariffs, meaning that the EU is now putting more and more pressure on the USA because the USA has been putting pressure on the EU. Now the EU is putting pressure on the US again. Now the US wants to put pressure on the EU again. This is something again that brings a bit more uncertainty into the market, but I would say that the EU has the short end of the stick here. The USA has the much longer stick here, and that is why the USA can use its clout and strength to force certain tariffs on other nations, and they cannot really negotiate much about it, even if they moan and so on and say, yes, the USA, what are they doing, and so on. Just like with the situation where the EU stability mechanism said that the US is threatening them and that they're now at risk with the euro, claiming that the stability of the euro or its independence is under threat from the US and so on. Yeah, I mean, the EU is making things harder for themselves by not being open to Bitcoin, by not embracing AI, and by not being open to technology, all while piling on more regulations. And in the US, it's the opposite. They're opening up to AI, opening up to Bitcoin, and rolling back regulations. And now there was another interesting statement from Donald Trump that could really make waves if it actually turns out to be true, as it's being confirmed here.
Importantly, and I said it, Ukraine, ceasefire. Ukraine, ceasefire. Just agreed to a little while ago. Now we have to go to Russia and hopefully President Putin will agree to that also, and we can get this show on the road. We can get this horrible war where 2,000-3,000 soldiers a week, every week, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 sometimes. I get the
So he says here that he now has a peace deal in the works between Ukraine and the USA, that they have already agreed on a ceasefire. Now Putin just has to accept it, and then there will be a daily ceasefire, and Donald Trump says he wants to end the war. And I think it should always be clear in the long run that, for the entire economy, for humanity, and so on, it's always better when there are no military conflicts. War always means a lot of damage in the long run, not just for people, but also for the economy, bombed houses, whatever, and people who have to die and so on. If this ends, it would be good for Bitcoin and the stock markets. There would be some relief, and there would be less uncertainty in the market. Unfortunately, on the other hand, it must be said that many industries also profit from this warmongering. Some arms manufacturers, and it's kind of absurd when you think about it, bombing cities and then rebuilding them is still good for the GDP, which is kind of strange. Just like when you hear examples, like if you go onto a highway and provoke a massive accident, a pile-up, that's good for the GDP too, because then there are a bunch of wrecked cars. Those damaged cars have to be repaired, which means new workers are needed, new materials are needed, and that leads to new economic productivity and so on. Well, it's always a bit absurd how everything is measured here. So yeah. From my perspective, it's bad to have war, but from some viewpoints, it can actually be good to have war. That means that some people actually think it's a good thing that there's a war here, because then certain sectors of the economy are stimulated and pushed forward. But I mean, that's a topic all on its own. But feel free to let me know in the comments below if you would think it's a good idea to finally have a peace deal. And then we have the next piece of news that we need to look at, and it's also very, very interesting. So we just got the news from Bloomberg that the Bank of Russia is going to allow crypto purchases for limited investors. So the central bank in Russia seems to be really keen on Bitcoin now, but not for everyone, only for limited investors, as it's being said. And that includes, for example, institutional investors, as well as other groups of investors, but not the entire population in Russia. Some people misunderstand this. They say, okay, Russia is now completely opening up to Bitcoin and stuff like that. And many people then thought, okay, this is the direct answer to the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Could be that it's related to the US as well, but for now, they're talking about a trial period. So it's not like they're saying, okay, we're going to go 100% on Bitcoin and make it legal tender or anything like that. Instead, there will first be a trial period. It specifically says here that the Russian central bank is proposing to allow the buying and selling of crypto assets for a limited number of investors. Only specially qualified private investors, qualified companies, and financial organizations are allowed to conduct transactions with cryptocurrencies. For financial organizations investing in crypto assets, the Russian central bank will set regulatory requirements to account for their risks. A special experimental legal regime will be introduced for 3 years. The Russian central bank still does not consider crypto as a means of payment. The central bank plans to allow all qualified investors to invest in derivatives, securities, and digital financial assets that don't deliver cryptocurrencies but are linked to their value. So, as I understand it, it's not even clear if this applies to spot Bitcoin or if it's just about derivatives, like whether you can hold all the derivatives or if you can hold derivatives and spot Bitcoin. So I always say, hey, get yourself a hardware wallet, have Bitcoin spot. So for example, it's best to go to 21 Bitcoin, then enter the code Bitcoin Hotel, and you'll get up to 20% off the fees when buying Bitcoin. That way, you can buy Bitcoin super safely, and it automatically connects to your TREZOR hardware wallet, which means you set up an auto hardware wallet transfer. That means as soon as you buy something at 21 Bitcoin, it will automatically be transferred to your TREZOR hardware wallet. You won't have any third-party risk. So even if 21 Bitcoin were to pull a rug pull tomorrow, try to scam you, the platform goes bankrupt, or something goes wrong, you've taken the third-party risk out of the equation. As long as you just leave it sitting on the 21 Bitcoin app or on another exchange or something, you always have that third-party risk. I mean, normally nothing happens there. For example, 21 Bitcoin has also separated their assets from the actual company. So theoretically, nothing can happen, but still, if you want to completely eliminate third-party risk, then you set up an auto wallet transfer. And that's also what I always recommend. And now they're talking about securities that in Russia, securities, derivatives, and stuff like that can be used. Yeah, for institutional players, it can make some sense, but for you, for most people, it often doesn't make sense to be trading with securities. The next story is about the tax issues, where it often becomes less attractive to hold securities compared to the actual underlying spot asset. Hey guys, by the way, I just went shopping. Check out my hyper-epic fruit stash here. Here's my strategic fruit stash. Here are coconuts. Here's honeydew melon, another honeydew melon, and one more honeydew melon and cucumbers to the moon. Then I've got some carrots here, and we have mangoes, watermelon, papaya, and even mangoes straight from the tree, fresh off the tree. Drop a comment about what you'd love to eat the most. Coconuts, mangoes, melon. You have the freedom to choose. Let me know in the comments below. Over here, the little hotler is just chilling. By the way, you can get such a cool hotler in the Bitcoin Hotel shop. Make sure to check it out too. I'll drop the link to the Bitcoin Hotel shop down below for you. There are also other cool merchandise items here, so definitely check it out. Here's the hodler, and now he's gone. Finally, I want to give a shout out to Luca, the finance hacker. If Satoshi Nakamoto had a son, it would probably be you. But even Satoshi Nakamoto would probably be scared to stack with you. To the moon or straight to Valhalla. Peace out.